Hello, and welcome to the Exponential Growth Podcast, powered by Analyst Investors. I'm your host, David Olivencia, co-founder of Analyst Investors, and a passionate advocate for leveraging innovation and technology to drive success. Let's get started. This is Exponential Growth. I also want to give gratitude to Salvi Media. They're the founding sponsor of the podcast. They're a premier executive content agency dedicated to crafting exceptional content and strategies that elevate companies' brands and their executives. They're creators of the Emmy Award-winning CEO series. I think many of you have seen that. We've also featured one of my portfolio companies, Analyst Investors and Hallow, on their CEO series. And they've had in-depth interviews with CEOs talking about their personal journeys and business experience. The CEO series can be found on Cheddar, Entrepreneur Magazine, Reach TV, and really want to thank Salvi Media for their support of the podcast. You can also follow them on social media, as well as they have a podcast studio in Chicago. Join them as well. So again, thank you, Salvi Media, for making this podcast possible. Today we have a dear friend, known this guy almost too long to tell, 30, 20 years, went to college together at Rolls-Royce Institute of Technology. It's the #1 undergrad engineering school in America, I think like 20 years in a row or so. For those who don't know Rolls-Royce, I always tell my friends on the East Coast, I say, hey, it is the Cooper Union of the Midwest, and they get it, right? And then to my friends on the West Coast, I say, it's the Harvey Mudd of the Midwest, and then they get it. And then I always tell them, yeah, we've been kicking your butt every year for 20 years, being the #1 U.S. News and World Report. So I've known this guy. We were in the same fraternity together. An amazing student, amazing leader. Welcome to the podcast, Scott Slisher.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, great. Well, Scott, I have certain insights into your life journey, and obviously spent some time in college together. I always tell people Scott's got the dirty secrets on me, but Scott's also good because I got the dirty secrets on Scott. So you're too much enough. But I think I got more than he has. Scott was a good guy. But Scott, tell our listeners and just to the listeners too. So we bring on different guests here. When I think about energy and the importance of energy and the broad impacts of energy, like the #1 leader, and I have a pretty interesting network, but the #1 leader I think of is Scott Slisher. So Scott, please tell our listeners a little bit about your life story.
Yeah, happy to do it. And Dave and I are both grateful that social media was an advent long after we were in action, if you will. So very good for both of us.
Many folks, I'm sure.
There are no pictures. So yeah, as Dave mentioned, known each other a long time. Indiana, born and raised, pretty similar to actually Dave, but very different circumstances, but pretty similar geography. So pretty neat for us to go to college together. And I learned a lot from Dave and certainly admired his trajectory during college. And boy, since he's had quite the career. So this has been fun to follow. Northwest Indiana, engineering degree from Rose-Hulman, mechanical engineering. Went on then to work at NIPSCO, which is Northern Indiana Public Service Company. So that was our home utility in terms of natural gas, electricity generation, distribution, transmission. And in that capacity, went through a management rotation program, really got to understand how utilities worked across the full business. Got very involved in our industrial base in that part of the country. And for anyone familiar, Northwest Indiana is rich with steel, refining, a lot of ancillary supporting industries, both to those as well as the auto space. So great opportunity to understand industry and what drove those businesses, the economics of energy. And so went to night school at IU, got an MBA at that time, got my professional engineering license very shortly thereafter, and was practicing in this engineering finance realm of designing thermal cycles, working on power plant development, and was fortunate to work in a competitive or non-regulated industry subsidiary of NIPSCO, and did a lot of cogeneration, combined heat and power projects over early in my career, which was fantastic experience. So over my skis in many cases, but it makes you learn fast.
Well, that's where you learn. That makes you tough.
That's where you learn. Your challenge, adaptive creativity or challenge. And then Went to work for AEP after that. Had a good segment working internationally. Did a lot of time in Southeast
And so
Asia.
just for our listeners, Scott, what's AEP?
Yeah. American Electric Power is one of the largest utilities in the U.S., spans from Michigan to the Mexican border, and vertically integrated utility today, roughly a $50-55 billion market cap, which sounds relatively paltry compared to some of the AI companies, but there was a
Nice
time
tech
when that was
companies,
big.
yeah, isn't it amazing? Like 55, like 10 years ago it was like, wow, that was, and now it's like,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
What's a few billions
Yeah,
among friends?
yeah.
Yeah.
If you're not Fortune 10, then you don't count. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, but good international experience, was able to put a lot of the same skills and fundamentals, first principles to apply, both technical and commercial. Um, Moved on from AEP in the early 2000s, did some time working in competitive markets. Texas opened up in 2001, 2002, doing retail electricity, getting involved in trading and marketing of gas and power. Come to really appreciate options, volatility, extrinsic value, and principles that don't necessarily come off of a traditional discounted cash flow analysis, but can generate wealth quickly when you're long, and when you're short, can generate a lot of pain. So
Yeah.
really came to respect and appreciate the value and issues around volatility and options.
Well, and
Worked
2001-ish, isn't that Enron time-ish with all
Enron
those kind of
collapsed.
interesting
Yep.
financial instruments around trading or fake financial, who knows what, but that was an interesting time to be Texas and in the energy space, and especially where you were doing there, right?
Correct. And I mean, a lot of corollaries to today. We had the internet, which was this thing everybody was really excited about, and we're pretty sure it was going to use tons of power. And so we had a boom in the US of building out gas turbine generation. Enron was in the midst of that. GE was in the midst of that. And all of it came crashing down shortly thereafter. Um, Interesting time. And again, you really do understand risk management, and when things don't go right, or when everybody starts behaving like a herd, what can happen to you? It's you all run off the cliff together. So AEP did not like all of that and decided to get out of those businesses and return to just a purely regulated utility. And we can talk more about that if it comes up. Went then and worked in the competitive energy marketing space only, so no utility stuff, which was good. And finished off the decade working for again, blast of the past, but solar really technologically exploded in the late aughts, and there was a foot race around photovoltaics, concentrating photovoltaics, thin films,
What's a
concentrating.
photo, Scott? What the heck's a photovoltaic? What
Yeah,
the heck is that?
we just say PV now.
Okay.
So PV, so what you would see today on a rooftop is
Okay.
photovoltaic. Yep.
Okay.
Again, we don't even think about it too much. It's ubiquitous now, but at the time, the conventional solar technology was trough mirrors and/or heliostats, where you're focusing sunlight on a tower, melting salt, and then converting it to steam and running a turbine. That was the technology of the time. And I worked for a Masdar, which was an Abu Dhabi sovereign fund investing in energy. And we were working on trough plants, looking at industrial applications as well as centralized generation IPPs at the same time that PV and other things. And in hindsight, PV not only won the day, it swept the field. And so
Yeah.
almost any other technology was that, but this boom, there was a clean tech 1.0. And so it was fun to participate in that. I was not on the winning technology front, but learned a lot. And actually, funny enough, Dave, for you and I, but the gentleman that had a lot of the IP I was working with actually was out of University of Chicago physics, and
Oh,
it was
wow.
a non-imaging optics. Back to one of our good friends, Mr. Aaron Barr, but was doing optics. But it was how do you concentrate or reconcentrate light when you don't need a focal point or an image like a camera? You just need to get the heat to a tube or a place. So pretty interesting kind of engineering to energy application. So did that. That again, PV swept the field very clearly. Any other investment was just stranded. You weren't going to get your capital out. Masdar wisely moved on to other fields, as did I, and started my own consulting business, working with commercial, industrial, government clients, trying to figure out how to reduce costs, how to better manage spend, looking at project opportunities. And if you remember,
And
again,
what
back
year, Scott, is this
yeah,
that you
we're in
started
the
your own?
late 2000s. So this would be like 2009, 10, 11,
Okay.
12, that range. And if, again, reset the clock back to booms and busts, at the time, the view was we're running out of gas. So gas prices were $7-8 an MMBTU. We were running tight on coal, and you had environmental constraints in terms of cleaning up sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide. This is before we were talking about CO2. And shortly thereafter, we came into shale. So there was a pretty big investment thesis around LNG imports. So we were building billion-dollar terminals to import, gas from Qatar and other
LNG,
destinations.
liquid natural
LNG,
gas, right?
liquefied natural gas. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, liquefied natural gas. So, again, a few short years later, we are exporting LNG from multi-billion-dollar terminals to all places. So anyway, was there, and then in 2012 came back to AEP. I had some good relationships that I had maintained throughout the years. And AEP, a decade later, decided they really wanted to be in competitive businesses, that the world was moving without them. And so I had a great opportunity to come back and lead a fairly large division doing energy management, supply, et cetera. And then within that environment, was able to incubate my current responsibilities, which was distributed generation, where we were and are making investments in customer sites where we're putting in assets. We own them, operate them, dispatch them, but the customer gets the benefit of that asset being located behind their meter, which is the point of settlement with the integrated utility. So essentially, there's an arbitrage between what's it cost to make it, dispatch it, run it, versus what would you have to pay if you bought it conventionally. And as we've moved over time, those economics have gotten more and more favorable for the host or the end user. So started that business in 2015 inside of this AEP competitive environment, progressed it, and then in 2024, AEP once again decided to become a regulated utility. And
like a pendulum. It's like a pendulum
every 10 years or so. And decided to sell out of that business. And we were acquired by Basalt Infrastructure Partners, and inside of what they have different vintages of funds, but we're inside of their fund 4. We were an early investment in that fund, and we'll be celebrating our 1-year anniversary here in a couple of weeks. So have moved
like a private equity fund, I guess. Is that
Yeah. Basalt is a Western European, North American private equity, focused on fiber optics, telecommunications, transport, and energy.
Oh wow, really cool. Really cool. Wow. I mean, what an amazing journey, right, Scott? I mean, different companies, different roles, different types of energy, different, call it even business models within there. So you've seen a lot from an energy perspective. There was one thought that applied optics. So you talked about applied optics. I have to go on this little tangent. So, Scott and I were at the school called Rose-Hulman, and actually I started when I first went into Rose-Hulman. I loved, I saw this field called applied optics, and it was like lasers and how they're cutting things. I knew how they cut chip. I said, man, that's so cool. That's what I'm going to study. My freshman year, I'm studying it, and it's doing good and all that kind of stuff. And then I think I saw they were towards the end of the year, said, yeah, these applied optics folks, they can't find a job. I was like, let's screw that. I got to pivot. I don't know. I go, I'm not here. I got to get a job when I get the hell out of here, man. So I went from applied optics to electrical engineering. And, I like electrical engineering. I was a DJ. I like, music. I like connecting, all that kind of stuff. And, and then kind of the rest is history. But you mentioned applied optics. I said, oh man, and our dear friend, Aaron Bart had to mention. I think he's done well, by the way. He's
done very well.
Applied optics has worked out for him. All right, cool. All right, so Scott, exponential growth, right? So everybody comes on this program. We say, hey, what's the hottest thing out there? And goes, oh, it's AI, and this AI. And I was like, okay, great. And then what I've been learning more and more about is what the big enabler to AI and really what's going to power and compete, help us compete with China. And really, for the most part right now, globally, I think it's like us and China, and then it's like everybody. I don't think anybody else is going to be able to compete with resources and scale and the models and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be really, really difficult, for the foreseeable future. So you got this 2-country race that's going on. but the enabler to all this stuff, I mean, so there, there's talk about data centers, right? And these data centers are cranking them out like tortillas. I tell a lot of people these data, so you can't turn around with any place in America where they're cranking out data centers. But guess what? It's like you got data center, you got chips, data centers, and electricity, right? Really kind of like call it the major three kind of levers here. And then on the energy side, you got lots of different types of energy to power these things. But you can crank out chips, you can crank out data centers, but this underlying kind of, I don't call it limiting resources, but we don't have infinite. And some could argue the sun, right? I mean, I don't know, you get your perspectives here, but when you see this AI race, this competition, you look at energy, you look at us competing with China, you look at, I mean, for everybody who's listening here, how this is going to impact your energy prices, what hits your pocketbook every day. How do you see this kind of global race, energy, AI, data center chip? How do you see this playing out, and what's your kind of overall perspective of what we should be looking at?
Could you ask a bigger question? Yeah, Dave, I think, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. When we talk about the nexus, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is exploding. There is so much capital chasing AI. It is driving everything. And again, none of us have to look far. Look at the S&P 500 and the concentration of the Mag 7. On the private equity side, where a lot of this activity is taking place, you can't even invest. You're locked out because you've got a lot of private equity who's trying to get as much of this action as they can. And even the AI, like how do you invest in AI? You're really limited in your options. A lot of this stuff is happening in a market that you can't get access to. So I think, in terms of going back to 2000, this is the internet plus. I think this is probably even big. It's certainly bigger technologically in the long term. Although I don't think any of us know exactly how this is going to play out, and there's as many things to worry about as to be excited. In terms of what has to happen for these folks, it is a race. It's an arms race. The bigger the center, the more compute, the more advancement can be made on the training side, as well as value capture and market share capture. We're on the front end. If Google has 90% of search today, who's going to be 90% AI queries? I mean, that race is on, and I think it's pretty evident, as we've seen on Internet 1.0, that those early winners are going to build some commanding heights. And we certainly moved away from some of the traditional antitrust measures. So realistically, if you can get this right, you probably got a decade or two run, and it may not be the same names that we're used to. So, money will drive a lot, and we're seeing it. What does it take to drive a DC or get a DC in the ground? One is economy of scale. So we've seen data centers go from, call it 20 megawatts 5 to 10 years ago to 100 meg. We're seeing DCs now that are 240 meg is almost a starting point. And we're seeing DC proposals that are more than a gigawatt or 1,000 megawatts, which in a traditional
what does that mean?
sense,
So the average, how could people wrap their head, our listeners, like, what is a megawatt? Like, how is it enough to power a whole city, or how should they think about it
on a
at the
simple
scale?
base, yeah, scale wise, a residential consumer will use around 1 kilowatt on average of usage. So 1 kilowatt, 1,000 kilowatts is 1 megawatt, and 1,000 megawatts is 1 gigawatt. So we're talking about 1 million homes average use.
Okay. Is what these data centers are cranking out, just at a scale.
That's right.
Wow.
That's the scale they're after. And different DCs have different purposes. So, when we're talking that scale, largely, these are AI training centers. Longer term, they're going to convert. But when you look at the use case, is it a training center? Is it an inference application? Is it an edge case? Is it a traditional cloud model? All those matter in terms of, you explained that well. You've got power, you got to have it. That's table stakes. No power, no compute, done.
Right.
But then you also probably are going to need water for cooling. And there are some that are doing dry cooling, wet rack dry cooling applications. You also need fiber. Somehow you got to connect. And what's your latency from a user base? So you could have a massive center in a relatively remote location with good power and water for training, or maybe you're doing crypto, for instance, but that's probably not going to work for an inference user down the road. So there are premium markets in the US. Virginia is number one. Everybody wants to be in Northern Virginia, best latency in the world, but it's jammed.
Why is that? Why is that?
Access to fiber. If you
Just track a ton of fiber, federal government, all that kind of stuff.
Proximity to New York City, So you have got all the elements from that center can train, it can use inference. You are so close to those markets. And, we got a lot of applications in the world where, milliseconds are millions, right? Their
Yeah.
time is everything. So
Yeah.
in terms of time and space, the closer you can get to those core hubs, the more important. But Virginia's built out. They don't have any more power. They're running out of land. The application's there. So those users are now moving elsewhere. Chicago, lots of power, more access to land, and a great fiber network. Again, not as good as Virginia, but really good. And everywhere now in between. So Columbus, for instance, Ohio, you're sitting between Virginia and Chicago. We've had thousands of megawatts of data center proposals and on-site going here now in Columbus, Ohio, which would not be traditionally a tech center. And obviously you had the West Coast, the original hubs, because of your proximity to Silicon Valley and Redmond, Washington. So
Yeah.
so as we look at this, Dave, I think you got to, there's the AI play, the training side, or the LLM development and build out. There's longer term, the inference and the usage of the AIs, but you still have crypto, and at $120,000 a Bitcoin, right? That has boomed. So the energy consumption on crypto has gone through the roof quietly, but there's a lot going on there. And then you got your edge case.
And so through the roof. So let's just, I mean, so is it how, because they do the mining for it, you got the trend, obviously they're doing the transactions on it.
Yeah.
What's driving it through? I mean, is it now
mining?
Because it's mining, because the last whatever million or so Bitcoins, you just need, more and more and more.
Yeah, much more. Yep.
And so it's going to get in. Is that another exponential curve? The amount of energy
it
you're
doubles
going to need to crack the code.
That's right. Yep, it doubles with each generation. So, and Bitcoin, to their credit, they don't need the same level of resiliency. So we talked about, it's not just power. When we think of power in kilowatt hours, but there's power in kilowatts or capacity. You're running a data center, you've made that kind of investment, you got to protect that investment, and you got to make sure you get a high utilization factor. So if you're buying NVIDIA GPUs, those can't be idle. You'll never get an ROI, even as much money as these folks have.
Because they're expensive.
Yeah, a 100 megawatt data center is going to run $10 to $12 billion. You're not going to take a chance in terms of your uptime or availability. So a traditional data centers, what we would say is 5 nines. So it's 99.999% available, which means you only have a few hours a year of downtime. In crypto, you can be interrupted. You can stop mining, you can start mining. So crypto has been smart in the way they've gone about this, is just find nooks and crannies. They don't need 100 megawatt sites. They can do 5 and 10s. So they're almost the gorillas in my mind of finding locations for, call them DCs, but they're really mining plants. It's a lower cost. They're really just doing compute. They don't need GPUs, or you need CPUs, and they don't need a 10-year or 20-year time horizon. If they can get a 5 to 10-year run, that's their payback.
Yeah.
They're good. So those folks have moved quickly, as we've seen crypto move from the fringe to, if not accepted, praised.
I'm big on crypto. I think crypto, I think we're still early. I mean, we're early. It's grown a lot, but I still think there's a big upside with crypto, with all the stuff, just call it the blockchain, where transactions are made, where finance is going. You've got federal governments now that are buying Bitcoin. You've got corporations that are putting it in their treasury more and more every day. Individual users, platforms like Coinbase that are offering crazy leverage. I mean, more, there's a lot of leverage out there. So it's, I think we're still a lot of, there's maybe 3 or 4 governments in the world that have, so if you get half of them, I think they said too, if just the ultra wealthy, I think the numbers like maybe 10-20% have any exposure to Bitcoin. If they just put 1% of their assets into Bitcoin, so you got all these different factors that I see. I still think there's tons of upside, on Bitcoin. So I kind of went off to a Bitcoin.
Well, it's fine, but it's part of the whole. I think we simplify this too often, and it's all AI. And the reality is the AI is still coming. NVIDIA can only make so many GPUs. Only so many data centers can get built at a time. So we haven't yet seen the AI power demand boom. It's coming. We're just, in my opinion, seeing a lot of traditional cloud growth, it's been on a growth track forever. Although efficiency, Moore's law, there's other factors that have tamped its demand over time. So the usage has gone way up. The amount of compute that's being produced is enormous, but the bit to watt, or the bit to compute spread, has been relatively maintained by technological advance. Now you get in with GPUs, which is a whole nother level of intensity and size. That's coming. I think what you're seeing right now is a lot of continued cloud, some early AI, and a lot of crypto that's been stealthily preparing itself. The spreads are there. And those folks, I mean, as you're getting to, Dave, I mean, it really is. They're taking electrons and they're commuting it into a digital good. But I mean, you can't eat it. You can't build with it. But I mean, realistically, it takes real power. And those demands are going to only increase as we move fully into AI learning, and then ultimately AI inference, as AI displaces a lot of our traditional applications, as well as has all new applications that we just can't conceive of as of yet. But those are all kilowatt hours. All of that's going to be manufactured with kilowatt hours. So where is this all going? Yeah, I mean, I
go ahead.
think what you're seeing in the near term is there is an absolute industry being formed the last 3 years of folks that are looking at what parts of the country can host these applications. So you've got traditional real estate develop, almost like oilmen, right? They're out trying to find these sites, front run the hyperscalers, get land, try to get electrically interconnected, and then flip those sites over onto another middleman or ultimately to a hyperscaler for use. You got co-locators. There's different business models and how you rent your compute, or do you own your compute? And it depends on the hyperscaler and or tenant application as to what they're going to do. So there's a whole industry out here right now trying to site these things. And for every, 4, 5, 10 of them, not all of those are going to come to pass. So you're seeing the demand, but the demand is in some ways multiplied because you've got these front end players that aren't exactly sizing. And just to make that more clear, it's hard to get interconnected to the existing utility grid. You can't just plug in. You got to go through a long process. Back to your electrical engineering, it's not just are there kilowatt hours, it's what's the immediate short circuit. What happens if a line goes down in an adjoining state? Will it overload the network? The goal is to protect that machine that we call the grid. And so when you interconnect new loads, there's a lot of study that's required.
Yeah,
We
a
can
lot of
talk about some.
bureaucracy. A lot of bureaucracy.
We talk through that. But what it means then is that if I want to develop a data center, no way am I going to rely upon a single site and a single interconnect. So if I know I need a gigawatt of compute, I'm not going one place and counting on one place to work. I'm going to go to 10, and I'm going to try to get 10 gigawatts. And I'm hoping that I can get at least one of those through. And maybe I got the luxury, I get 2 or 3, and maybe I sell off the excess to somebody else at a profit. So we've got a boom going on trying to secure these sites, build these sites, contract for the resources. And so there is absolutely some double, maybe triple or quadruple counting in some of the numbers we're seeing. But the ultimate trend is clear. I mean, these things are going to get built. There is going to be that demand that we haven't had previously. So in terms of what that means for us as a system, how much should you build in terms of transmission and generation to support this? If you build too much and it doesn't show up, somebody's going to lose money. And it's as if it's a competitive market, it might be an independent power producer. But if it's a regulated utility, all the rest of their ratepayers are going to pay for that, just like we saw at the end of the nuclear cycle when all the nuclear plants got canceled and ratepayers' bills went through the roof. So you got that piece of it. On the energy side, if you conserve the load, then you still got to make the power. And I think the fuel of choice is definitely natural gas. By far and away, we don't have the coal resources we once did. It's harder to get. It's more expensive. It's a longer cycle. Gas.
When you say, but this is the fuel to power the data centers, or
That's correct.
so
100%.
natural gas. So like I think at least me in my mentally, I mean, and maybe the listeners out there, think about data centers, think about powering data centers. I think most people in their minds are thinking about electricity, right? I mean, that's my take, right?
That's where that's right. But there's two things that are interesting in data centers. One is the marginal source of power for us today is natural gas. So if it's more electricity, there's more gas. They're just hand in step. The other side is that many of these data centers, because of the race with China, because of the race with their peers, and or because they've already bought GPUs and they need them to run. They don't want GPUs in a warehouse. They need GPUs producing compute for return on investment. If they can't get that grid interconnection, their recourse is to build their own generation on site. And what are you going to power it with? Natural gas.
Got it. So Scott, one of the things, that as you were just kind of laying that out, is kind of, you have visibility. So like, you know, others, you know, you read the news and you kind of just see where all this stuff is going, and, you know, chips are getting created. You hear kind of data center, but like you're probably like a double click below that, and you're actually seeing like, no, all the action that is happening, the data centers that are being bidded on and all that kind of, and the fighting for energy and all that kind of stuff. But which I said, wow, there's something there that I don't think people get. But the other thing you mentioned that I think is interesting is that, so like these things haven't even come on call it the grid or whatever yet. Like when you know, the next whatever 3, 4, 5 years, when all this stuff is on the grid and all these chips and stuff are cranking away and doing things, the amount of change and the amount of innovation and the amount of, you like, if you think we've seen a lot of change now, you haven't seen anything yet. You haven't seen anything yet. And that's kind of one of the insights I picked up from what you were saying there. And Scott, maybe if you can double click on that and then just maybe wrap with like, how should people think about investing? Like where there's all these trends going, and just from this energy perspective, where are some growth areas over the next several years from your side?
So to the load side, the forecast, and again, you can get numbers from lots of places, but I think it's reasonable. We're probably going to see somewhere between an 8 and 10% increase in energy usage, electricity usage in the US by 2030, which is enormous. To put that in context,
per year or no, or
per
just
year,
per year. So, and I'm glad our electricity prices aren't going to go up by that much, right? Hey, you're smiling.
Well, I'm smiling. So, and again, I like your double clicks. I don't know how many double clicks we want to go, but double click one would be, I mentioned natural gas. The other things going on, and you started this with China and the global economy. So natural gas, we are blessed in the U.S. as being deep reserves of natural gas. We've gone from, we don't have enough, as I mentioned in the late aughts, to now where we have got 250, 300 years of proven gas reserves. I mean, we've got gas as long as you can see. However, for producers, they want to sell that gas and they want to sell it into the highest price markets they can get. So we've actually had a number of years here where we've had gas that people are holding back because they don't want to sell it at $2 or $2.50 an MMBTU. They want to sell it at $6 or $7, or at least a fair price. So we've seen a massive build out of LNG, liquefied natural gas facilities over the last few years, and we've got a whole slate more coming on by 2030. So just to put this in context, American consumers industry used historically about 80 BCF a day on average. We'd use roughly another 20 or so BCF for power generation. And then some of that's seasonal, right? We use more in the winter when we're heating. We use more gas for power in the summer when we're air conditioning. The amount of LNG capacity that'll be online by 27, 28 is going to be around 30 BCF. So we're going to increase the ability to pull gas out of the ground by roughly 30% over this period, call it 2022 to 2028. But that gas is going to go international, and it's going to command an international price. So we are quickly going to be in a spot where, as a gas producer, marketer, why would I sell my gas in a domestic market that's oversupplied if I can sell it overseas? Now, there's a basis differential to chill, compress, and ship that gas. So there will always be a spread, if you will. But essentially, there'll be some harmonization of a global price of gas and our price of gas. And we've never had that. We've always been an isolated market in the US with Canada and Mexico.
So we can sell, we'll be able to sell it internationally. We got to, you know, a lot of it here domestically. We're going to use it domestically. Yeah. How does that impact the price of electricity?
It drives the price up.
I already paid too much. Everybody, I think everybody who's listening to say, I already paid too much. Data centers, AI is going to drive it. You're telling me, Scott, we're going to go about 8-10% per year up. Your price of gas go 8-10% per year up, roughly for the next 5 years or so, right?
Yeah. So,
and even that's with this natural. We got all what Scott, you just told me, we got all this natural gas. I mean, we can now get it. They're going to send it overseas and all that kind of stuff. But you got whatever hundreds of years of it. What can solar help? What else helps? But 8-10%. I think we're breaking news here, Scott.
Well, to be clear, the 8 to 10% is the percentage increase in load over the next 5 years. So we're saying is there'll be 10% more load in 2030 than there is today. And that may not sound like a lot, but in totality of a modern economy, and we're in, we use 25% of the world's energy. Like we like our energy. So that is a lot. In our industry in energy, we have typically been using the same or less year over year over year because of efficiency, because of improvements. And even as we talk AI, right, we think AI is going to make us smarter, improve our building systems, our use of heating and cooling, transportation, et cetera. So in theory, that's with all those other aspects coming in.
Yeah.
What happens? Gas, goes up because of international pricing. The other piece that everyone needs to understand in electricity, before the advent of batteries, which is another technological disruption. So back to your kind of original question, we couldn't store electricity. You make it exactly as you need to use it. And this is a double E, but right, we run a 60 hertz system, and that system has to be exactly 60 hertz. That's the cycle, not 60.1, not 59.9, it's 60.
Yeah.
So we're exactly balanced between load and supply. Well, as data centers come in, that is going to naturally put more and more base load on the grid, which means that the resources that have to be run are higher and higher up the supply stack. So if you thought about that, if I had, I've got my Sunday best clothes, and then I've got my Saturday okay stuff, and I got my, week, whatever. The more the Sunday best I got to use, the less I have. I have to start going to the other stuff. And so in energy, we have locationally marginal priced markets. So every organized regional transmission organization in the country, Texas, PJM in the Mid-Atlantic, New England, California, all of those markets are run with the idea of economic dispatch. So the next generator that has the cheapest electron to sell, that's who you're going to buy from. And then they have a supply stack or a list of generators, like who do I call next? Who do I call next? If you take out the bottom 15, 20%, where that didn't used to exist with the data centers, then you just push yourself up the stack. So it's not just that the price of gas is higher, it's that the unit you're going to buy is a unit that didn't used to be in the dispatch stack. It used to be out of the money. Now it's in the money. So the price for energy goes up for everybody.
Yeah. Wow. So Scott, then if you had, or when you, if where should people invest, right? If we go like more, like, do you think is the big bet, is it data centers? Is it solar panels? Is it LNG? Is it real estate in West Virginia? Right? Because it's close there.
Yeah.
So, it's probably a lot cheaper. Where should people, where do you see, where are the big bets you think from an investment perspective are going to be made in this kind of the space?
Yeah, I like the way you laid this out when you started with, look, could you directly invest in AI? And the answer is kind of, again, some, chat, no. But there are a number of companies, right, that are public. You can make an investment in. Do you want to invest in the compute supporting AI? Yep, you got some options there. Do you want to invest in the watts, the kilowatts that are going to drive the AI? So that could be electricity, that could be natural gas. So that could be independent power producers on the electricity side. That can be your E&P companies on the gas side. Those are all like everywhere up that stack, that whole supply chain, and then the chips. So again, if you want to buy Nvidia, which again I think people have figured out if you haven't seen stock price, right? I mean, if you they own that, they own that market. So I mean, you could buy Nvidia and not try to guess at who's going to have the best model. So how precise do you want to get? Do you want to diversify across that? The other piece is, what are some of the substitutes? And you started to go down this road. If the thesis is that we're going to use a lot more gas, we're going to export gas, and gas is a primary driver of the marginal kilowatt hour, then it should drive up kilowatt hour prices. So what are other techs or disruptions that might enter the market? The beauty of markets, right, is the solution for a high price is a high price. So run the price up, and lo and behold, you'll get innovation as people rush to meet that new opportunity. And I think in the U.S., vehicle to grid stuff. I mean, what if your car, can plug in at home at night or during the day to dispatch timely generation back into the market? So I think that whole economy around residentials, battery storage, cars, which are much bigger battery than any kind of Tesla Powerwall. Car would be 70 to 100 kilowatt hours, for a house that might use 20 kilowatt hours a day. Move it along. Solar is a great one you mentioned. Solar has been blocked out in many cases because of the political climate we're in, right? It's just become anything renewables is a dirty word, which is frankly really hard to understand because megawatt hour is megawatt hour. The electrons don't have a political party. But on the residential side, and if you look at Germany and some other countries, there are a lot of innovations around balcony solar, for instance, is a German thing. They have a micro inverter on a solar panel you can hang off the balcony of your apartment and make 400 watts. I mean, it's something. It's cheap. It's
Yeah,
easy. You don't need an
yeah.
electrician to install it. You plug it in an outlet. And I think, and again, you would know better than I on some of your travels, but Puerto Rico, some countries like telecom are going to skip this whole grid thing and just go straight to renewables and microgrids. You got solar with a battery in a, equatorial setting where you're going to have good sunlight more often than not. You don't need a grid. So I think there's an opening here longer term for both the control side, like how do we smartly use energy down to even a residential level, but also folks turning the stuff into a product. We all have air conditioners. Don't think twice. You got a furnace. You don't think twice. Like there's no reason you can't make your own power at home. And again, I think we're going to see some of those things come out. So that would be a substitute, opportunity. It
Yeah.
wouldn't be directly in the chain, but if all boats are rising, like what are some of the other substitutions that are going to take place with higher prices?
Scott, there's so many, godly, we touched on so many different topics. I know you got a lot of stuff going on. How do people stay connected with you, follow your insights on social media, if at all? How do people stay connected with you?
Yeah, well, I mentioned that social media thing, Dave. So yeah, that's I do use LinkedIn. That's probably the best way, and I'm
Okay.
genuinely happy to take inquiries or connections. I do. As you know, there's so much to know and learn. And you mentioned double clicking. Every time you double click, there's another 5 or 6 things that are curious and interesting. So I love making connections with people and learning more. And I think you and I were talking a bit before the pod here, but I think that continuous improvement mindset, a lifelong learner, is fantastic. So anyway, LinkedIn's great. Happy to make the connections and always willing and able to learn from somebody else.
Yeah, the double clicking, and what they say is the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know, right?
Yep.
And so, like energy, look, I mean, I know enough about energy to be dangerous, right? But the good news is I know good friends who know a hell of a lot more about this. And I think you say, hey, and then Scott, you just laid out like 50 different sub areas of energy, right? And each of those has their own level of complexity and knowledge and disruption and all kinds of stuff. So that's kind of the goal of, with this podcast, the Exponential Growth Podcast, right? It's just that we begin to share these thoughts, get some great leaders who are deep in this space, share perspectives, and help our listeners understand what are the trends and investment areas, and just where do how do you forge a path during these times. So Scott, I want to thank you for jumping on the pod. Well, as I guess in the next couple of years we'll have you on. We'll see as energy prices go up or down. We'll have you on and get a perspective there. But thanks. I know you got a lot of stuff going on. So thanks for jumping on the pod.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.